Okay, so this is a third part in a series that I started a couple of weeks ago, and the topic is the authenticity of the Torah. How do we know the Torah was given at Sinai? How do we know the story is true? It's not a fairy tale, and so on. And we discussed this last week pretty thoroughly, and the last 2 weeks actually. And now I said to you last week that we're going to discuss tonight the topic of Rabbinic Law. Rabbinic Law, we all know, is a very big part of Jewish life and of our religion and our daily life. I mean, there's almost no Jewish topic that doesn't include in it hundreds, if not thousands, of Jewish laws. I mean, the rabbinic laws. And the question that I put in the title was, who gives them the right to tell me what to do and what not to do? And why do we have to follow it? And do we have to follow it? Now, I should mention that this is a topic that deserves more than one evening. It deserves much more than one evening. But I will try my best to encapsulate it in this an hour and 15 minutes that we have before us. The last 2 weeks, if you remember, I spoke to you 2 weeks ago about proving to you that Sinai actually happened and that such a story can never have been made up. I also discussed with you understood, all this can be explained. There's disputes. Mankind argue about many different things. And someone has also, they agreed upon a system where they would figure out how to resolve an issue, let's say by a majority or whatever. The question is a bad background, so please mute yourself. The question here is, if we're talking about God's law should be straightforward. There should be no So that's affliction. Others will say, I can't go, I can't have whatever, my, chocolate ice cream every day. That's affliction. How do we know what affliction is? And how is it that there are no disputes regarding the affliction? There was never a time in history that there was a sage that suggested that we shouldn't find that affliction means anything other than eating and drinking, and not eating and not drinking. You know why? Because Moses told it that A year later, the rabbi said, such a miracle happened. We got to thank God for this miracle. We can't just let the day go by without recognition of a great kindness that God did for us. So they legislated a law that from now on the Jewish people should celebrate Purim every year on the same day. And the same thing happened with Chanukah. They said, we have to thank God for this miracle that he did. It's only right. Yeah, Jews were able to marry more than one wife up to 1,024 years ago. But Rabbeinu Gershon and his court saw the weakness in that, saw that society is not capable of being able to be managed properly if we did continue that. So he put a ban, he banned polygamy. But as I said, he lived in Ashkenaz, he lived in Germany. The Jews of Morocco and Algiers and Spain were not under the jurisdiction of Rabbeinu Gershon. So the fact that he forbade polygamy up north it wasn't binding on the Jews of the south. In other words, the rabbis around Rabbeinu Gershon all accepted it. In Paris, in France, and in other places up north, in northern Europe. But in the southern countries where the Sephardim lived, they never accepted that. And they continued to practice polygamy. You know till when they practiced polygamy? Till 1948. When Jews came from the Sephardic countries to Israel with the creation of the modern state of Israel, many of them came with 2 wives. And Israel was in a dilemma. What do we do here? And they allowed it. They said you can continue living with your 2 wives, but you can't marry. Anyone coming now to Israel can marry 2 wives. So in other words, you're grandfathered in if you have 2 wives. You get old, you age, you live your ripe old age, you pass away, and over the next, it ended, obviously. There weren't that many that came with 2 wives to begin with, because probably even the Jews in Sephardic communities also recognized that it's probably not the healthiest thing to do. But some did. So today no one does. Everyone accepted it today. Even the Sephardic rabbis accepted today the polygamy ban. But I'm just giving you examples. Now I asked you before, why is this not why are rabbinic laws not a violation of the prohibition to add to the Torah? The answer is the Rambam Maimonides discusses this, and he lays down the rule as follows. He says, what's considered adding or subtracting to the Torah? For example, if a rabbi comes and says, I spoke to God yesterday, and he told me, let's say Mordechai and Esther would come on Purim after the miracle happened, and they would come and say, I spoke to God yesterday, and he revealed himself to us, and that this should now become the 614th commandment. That would be a gross violation of the Torah. They're not allowed to, that they can't do. They have to indicate clearly and that this is their law, not God's law. In other words, that they legislated this. This is not another commandment that's added on to the 613. So that it's not considered an addition onto the Torah, as long as they're saying it's rabbinic. But at the same time, God gave the law that we have to follow, the rabbinic laws. So there's a protection over here. The Torah remains exactly as it was given by God to Moses, 613 laws. Then the rabbis came and said, we're going to legislate if we see that we need to build a fence around the law, or let's say they want to recognize a miracle that happened, so they added that, and so on. But they always said this is a rabbinic law. But here's what's interesting. When you light the Chanukah candles, you're actually making a blessing. You know what the blessing is? We say, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech olam, blessed are you, Lord, the King of our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with His mitzvahs, and He commanded us to light the Chanukah candles. Now that's bizarre. God didn't command us to light the Chanukah candles. The rabbis of the time of Chanukah commanded it. So why are we saying that God gave us this mitzvah? So Rambam addresses this, and you know what he says? He says, what we're really saying is that in this blessing, what we mean is God commanded us, sanctified us with His mitzvahs, and commanded us to follow the rabbis who told us to light the Chanukah candles. That's what we mean. And it's interesting, I want to point something out. The rabbis did something else when it came to their laws. They made a very big distinction between their laws and the biblical laws. How so? So here's how. So let me give you an example. You're not allowed to mix meat with milk. That's biblical, right? What happens if your wife is cooking a dairy soup with milk and other ingredients, a dairy soup, and by mistake a piece of steak fell into that pot, or a little gravy of the steak fell into the pot? Now you have a mixture of gravy, meat gravy, which is meat, and milk. What do you got to do with it? You call the rabbi. What do I do, right? But it's clear what you have to do. What's clear? What would you do if that happened?
Throw it out.
Well, not so sure, not so fast. The law is that if you have 60 times the amount of milk against the meat, gravy, the whole mixture is okay, because the taste of the meat is lost. 60-1 is considered not a mixture anymore. It's as if there's no meat there. It's bottle. It is nullified in the 60 times amount of milk. Right? And the same would be with rabbinic, with chicken. Your wife is making a chicken soup, and into the chicken soup fell a little bit of milk. So again, you have to measure 60-1, 60 if there's 60 amount of milk, more of chicken, the soup, more than the milk, you can eat it. It's not a problem. You don't have to throw it out so fast. Now, there's a lot of details in this. Don't rule. It's always good to ask a rabbi. But here's an interesting distinction. What happens if you don't know if there's 60-1? You're doubtful. You didn't see exactly how much milk fell in. So it could be it's nullified, it could be it's not. You're not sure if there's 60-1. So here's the law. If it's meat and there's a doubt, it's a biblical prohibition, you have to throw it out. If it's chicken and milk mixture and you're not sure, the rabbis were lenient. They said, on our laws you could be lenient if you're not sure. In other words, where there's a doubt, by a biblical law you have to be stringent, and by a rabbinic law you could be lenient. And the rabbis did that intentional, because they always wanted there should be a distinction between biblical law and rabbinic law. Even though it's binding both, we have to follow both. But they were more lenient with their own laws. And they had the right to do that, because they're the ones that prohibited it to begin with. So they have the right to be lenient. How far the prohibition will go. So that's in their, that's in their purview to do that. Another thing, in order for a rabbinic law to become binding on everyone, it has to be accepted at the time by all the Jewish people. And any law that we have today, that's a rabbinic law, that's in the Talmud, was accepted by all the Jewish people, and therefore it can never be abolished. There was a time, for example, it says, we're told that Daniel, the prophet Daniel, wanted to make a law that to prohibit non-Jewish oil. We have a prohibition against non-Jewish wine. You're not allowed to drink non-Jewish wine. Well, he wanted to forbid also non-Jewish oil. Any oil that was handled by a non-Jew should not be, for whatever reason, he had his reasons. But it wasn't accepted amongst the Jewish people, so they abolished it. They went checking. Is it accepted? Is it going? No, it didn't. It became they nullified the law. And there are other such situations. Now, there are certain legislations that started all the way back from Moshe's time, by the way. Let me give you an example. We read the Torah, right? Every Monday and Thursday and Shabbos, right? Who instituted that we should read Torah every Shabbos, the portion of the Torah? When did that start? Does anyone know? It started by Moshe himself. He's the one that legislated that law. He gathered the 71 elders, and together they legislated that law. You ever paid a shiva call? You went to visit someone when they lost a loved one, they're sitting shiva. So when did Jews, in the Torah there's no such a thing as sitting shiva. It's a rabbinic thing. When did they institute this law to sit shiva? You know who did that? Who made that law? Moshe's Sanhedrin. That started all the way back to the time of Moses, to sit shiva. And many such laws. We think that it came later. It didn't come later, but it came from the rabbis. Moshe was also a rabbi. That's not a biblical thing. That he made together with his Sanhedrin as a rabbi. The received tradition he brought to us from God. But then he also legislated law. And in his time, they also derived certain laws. That's what rabbinic law is. Now, let me tell you a few things. So, for example, we have the Talmud. Anything that's in the Talmud, I said, is binding on everyone. Because God told us that if a Sanhedrin passes it, if the Jewish courts all over come to an agreement and pass a law, you must follow it. That's a biblical obligation we have. So let me give you an example. When people say, but it's only rabbinic, it's such a flawed understanding of our religion. I'll give you an example. Imagine God came into this room and he looked at all of you watching the Zoom and he said to you guys like this: tomorrow morning, I want you all to do 10 jumping jacks. Let's say just whatever. I'm just giving you a silly example. God said, I'm giving you a law that for tomorrow morning I want you to all do 10 jumping jacks. And when you finish doing the 10 jumping jacks, I want you all to eat Cheerios for breakfast. And when you finished eating Cheerios, Rabbi Spalter is going to then tell you what to do. And whatever he tells you, you listen to him. And I come and tell you that I think you should also eat scrambled eggs. So what? So you're going to say, well, the scrambled eggs I don't have to eat. I only have to eat the Cheerios. It's silly. He told you to... on the side, God whispers into my ear, don't just make up laws just because you like to. There's got to be a system. And when you follow my system, that's the type of law I want you to legislate tomorrow morning for the 9 people or whatever people that are watching. So I come to you and I scratch my head and I go through the system of those 13 principles and I say, I think it should also include scrambled eggs. So imagine someone come and say, that's only rabbinic. That's a silly notion. You heard God told you to follow what I say, so why is it rabbinic? Yes, it's rabbinic. I came up with the law. I was the one that told you, based on the system, what to do. I'm giving you a silly example of scrambled eggs. The point is that the system. Is it more important that you eat the Cheerios than the scrambled eggs? They're both equal. God wants both. One he told you directly, and one he told you through me. What difference does it make? It doesn't make a difference. There's so much more that we can say about this. And yeah. So today we have what's called the Code of Jewish Law. In every Jewish library you have the Shulchan Aruch, called the Code of Jewish Law. What's that? What is the Shulchan Aruch? The Shulchan Aruch is basically written by Rabbi Yosef Cairo 500 years ago approximately. What he did was, he collected all the halachas from the Talmud The Talmud, the problem with the Talmud is as follows. When you look in the Talmud and you try to learn laws from the Talmud, very difficult, because the Talmud is a very disorganized, I don't want to say that about the Talmud, but it's not an organized book of law. It's conversations, rabbis arguing, and for the regular layman to deduce what's the final law, most people won't know how to do that from the Talmud. But there were great rabbis that did know how to do that. Maimonides was the first one that did that, and then the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, up to his time 500 years ago, collected all the laws from the Talmud all the way back to Moses, and he also added the things that were made after Talmudic times, and in those laws there may be some disputes. It's interesting that the Shulchan Aruch was written in such a way where there's glosses in the Shulchan Aruch itself from the Ashkenazic rabbi. Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the author of the Code of Jewish Law, was a Sephardi rabbi. So he basically took all the laws of the Talmud, which are binding on everyone, but anything that was post-Talmudic, he ruled according to the Sephardic tradition. But in the law, it's in the glosses, in the laws of the Shulchan Aruch, it was they already included the Ashkenazic rabbis and said, we feel different about this law. So anything that's post-Talmudic, you have both laws there, the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim. And if you're Sephardi, you go with the Rabbi Yosef Cairo. If you're an Ashkenazi, you go with the Ashkenazi ruling. But that's it. But it's all organized in law. So is it binding? Of course it's binding. Do they have the right to tell us what to do? The rabbis never just came up with unreasonable laws. That's another important thing you have to know. Rabbis have no right to legislate without a reason. Obviously. There has to be a reason behind every legislation that they come up with. And they always had a reason. And good reason. And the Torah says you must follow their laws. Because you know what happens if we don't follow Rabbinic law? We don't have a Torah. And I want to say this as in closing. I want you to think the following. You know, most Jews make this distinction between rabbinic and biblical. It's only rabbinic, it's not biblical, it's not really so important. But if you looked at any Jewish custom or any Jewish tradition today, let's take, for example, a wedding. A Jewish wedding is such a special moment, right? Who doesn't love a Jewish wedding? Or any wedding for that matter, but a Jewish wedding, we're talking about Judaism. What does it take to get married on the biblical level? What does it take to have a Jewish marriage on the biblical level? You'd be surprised, you wouldn't believe it. If I today walked over to a woman and I gave her a few pennies in front of two witnesses, she's my wife. And I told her, with this I'm going to marry you, and she agreed, she's my wife. No chuppah, no nothing, no ring, no blessings, none of that, no ketubah, none of that is biblical. Well, let me give you another example, the Passover Seder. You know what we have to do on the biblical level on Passover? Not tonight, this year, Pesach night in 2020. You know what you have to do biblically? You have to eat an ounce of matzah, and you have to tell your son, you have to relate the story of the Exodus. Nothing else. You can sit in your jeans. I'm serious. On the biblical level, Pesach could look like this. You sit there with your polo shirt and your jeans, and you can take a stool in your kitchen table, and not even the table, but the countertop, right, the stool, and your wife brings out a third of a matzah, and you eat it. You don't even make a blessing, because the blessings are all rabbinic. And you, for 5 minutes or even 2 minutes, you tell your daughter, your son, your wife, 3,500 years ago we were in Egypt and God took us out of there and there was a wonderful Exodus. Good night. You have fulfilled Pesach according to biblical law. If you do that, I'm serious, I'm not joking. You know what Pesach looks like today? 4 cups of wine, kiddush, the karpas, the salt water, the charosas, the shank bone, 3 matzahs, washing twice, telling a long story, the 4 questions, this entire Seder. Now I ask you, which one would you rather do? No, honestly, which one would you rather have? The Seder as we have it, or the one I described to you that you can do on your stool with your jeans? I've no doubt that most Jews, if not all, would say, that's not Pesach. I want the Seder the way we know it, right? That's all biblical. That's all rabbinic. There's no Judaism without the rabbinic Judaism. It would look, you couldn't recognize Judaism if you took out the rabbinic Judaism. Most people today don't even realize how much of our tradition is rabbinic. And we ask the question, do we have to do the rabbinic Judaism? Just imagine what Judaism would look like if it was biblical. You know what Yom Kippur would look like if it was biblical? The biblical Yom Kippur would be, of course, you don't eat or drink. What else? Nothing else. You can lay on your couch and look at the ceiling for 24 hours. As long as you don't eat or drink, you're a biblical Yom Kippur Jew. Anyone want such a Yom Kippur? I don't. That's Yom Kippur. That's heresy, right? You see someone doing that. So what kind of Jew is that, right? Well, he'll tell you, I'm a biblical Jew. What are you talking about? But the Torah doesn't work that way. We don't have only a biblical Torah. We have a rabbinic tradition that must and continues to be vibrant. And God also wanted the human contribution in Torah. That was also very important. He wanted a partner in the Torah. And where do we partner with God in Torah? When we legislate, when we derive, when we perfect the Torah, when we make it our Torah, when we add to it, not add a mitzvah, God forbid, but we enhance it and we come up with the new laws that are hidden in the Torah, based on the rulings, of course, based on the system. The minute the rabbis deviate from the system, they're out. It's not binding, of course. It's heresy. That's heresy. But the rabbis were always loyal to the system. So we should embrace rabbinic Judaism because it's what gave color, it gave life, it gave a beauty to the biblical myths, to the biblical Torah. And one without the other is it's a husband without a wife without a husband. It's not Judaism. So we shall love rabbinic Judaism. It enhanced it, it made it so much richer. And with that, I open up for questions. If anyone has a question, please feel free to ask. It is 25 after 9. So if you don't have any questions, I'll call it a night. You do have? Okay, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and thanks for watching. I enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And we'll be back for more next week on probably a different topic.
Rabbi, can I ask one question?
Sure.
You probably went over it already. Did Aaron derive, ways of doing things, customs, manhaj, traditions, of ways of doing things?
Sorry, what was that? Did Aaron, you said?
Yes. Did Aaron, come up with, concepts, derive interpretations from Hashem, and try to interpret Hashem's way of doing things, or make customs? Or did he have a Sanhedrin below him to make the decisions?
Well, if there was a question that he had doubt during when he was in his, at the time when he was teaching, and a question came to him, there would be a process by which they would then settle the matter, figure it out. It's either it's the two things that I mentioned. If it wasn't received directly from Moses, he didn't hear a clear direction from Moses, that's when the job of trying to figure it out on their own started. So they figured it out through the system, and if they could figure it out by themselves and all in agreement, great. And if they fought it out, and each one tried their hardest to convince their colleagues, and at the end they took a vote.
Majority won.
And the majority was the one that ruled by the majority, yeah.
Okay. All right. And the ones that lost the vote, did they pout?
Did they what?
Did they pout and go to the...
They were dejected, right? They felt, I lost this one. No. They were so happy. Again, you have to understand, why were they happy? They didn't have personal agendas, these people. You think Aaron had a personal agenda? I want to be right. No, he was looking for one thing. What does God want? What is God's intention here? And if God said the majority should rule, the moment that ruling was passed down, he was a satisfied man. He was very, very happy. We got to the truth.
Okay.
They weren't looking to be right. They were looking, what did God want?
I like it.
That's the truth. That's the uniqueness of the Sanhedrin, of these great sages who were all holy men. They were spiritual holy men.
Very nice. Very, very nice.
Anyone else?
I'll see you in the morning.
Okay. Have a wonderful day. A good evening, everyone, and a good night and a good Shabbos. And hopefully very soon we can see you in person. Leonard, have a good night. I see you quiet all night, but I see a picture. All the best to you, and we'll be in touch. All those watching on Facebook, it was great. I hope you all enjoyed it. And a good night to all of you as well.
Good night, Rabbi. Drive safely.